Paul McCartney woke up one morning in early 1965 in what neuroscientists now call the hypnagogic state, that narrow window at the edge of consciousness, with a complete melody in his head. Not a fragment, not a rough sketch, but a long, fully formed tune, sitting there, as though someone had placed it carefully while he slept. He moved straight to the piano, picked it out, and knew immediately it was good. Too good, actually. So good that he spent the next month travelling round to everyone he knew in the music business, playing it to them and asking the same question each time. Have you heard this before? Because he was certain he must have stolen it from somewhere. He hadn't. The melody was his, and it became Yesterday, a song that would rack up over 7 million documented performances in the 20th century alone, with more recorded cover versions than almost any other song in history. And it arrived from a dream. That story gets told as a charming footnote about inspiration. But it's actually a precise, if accidental, case study in one of the more interesting states the human brain can enter. Researchers have spent the last few years working out why that particular state produces results that deliberate, waking thought often simply can't. Here's what makes it genuinely strange. McCartney wasn't in deep sleep when the melody appeared, and he wasn't in full creative flow at the piano either. He occupied the space in between, that narrow window right at the edge of consciousness, where you're no longer fully awake, but haven't yet crossed into actual sleep. Researchers call it the hypnagogic state, or sleep onset, technically the N1 stage of non-REM sleep. And for most people it lasts only a few minutes before they either fall properly asleep or pull themselves back to wakefulness. What makes this stage neurologically distinctive is the brain's shift from alert alpha waves toward the slower theta waves associated with drowsiness. It's that alpha-theta transition that appears to be doing the interesting creative work. A 2021 study published in Science Advances from the Paris Brain Institute, led by neuroscientist Célia Lacaux and senior author Delphine Oudiette, examined this window closely. Working with 103 participants, they ran everyone through an insight problem-solving task, what researchers formally call insight problem-solving, that contained a hidden rule, a shortcut that, once spotted, allowed near-instant solutions. After an initial work period, participants took a rest break, then returned to the problems. The people who entered the hypnagogic state during that break, even briefly, spending at least 15 seconds in this very first phase of sleep onset, were roughly 3 times as likely to discover the hidden rule as those who stayed awake throughout. From 15 seconds of a specific brain state, the difference was that large. This is a single study and warrants replication. But the result lines up with a body of anecdote that starts looking considerably less like anecdote when you see numbers attached to it. What's worth sitting with, though, is the specificity of the effect. It disappeared entirely if participants fell into deeper, non-REM sleep stages. The window wasn't sleep in general, it was the edge itself, that borderline between one state and another. Salvador Dalí, who almost certainly never read a neuroscience paper in his life, had worked this out by feel decades earlier. He called the state sleeping without sleeping, and his method involved sitting in a chair holding a key over a metal plate, letting himself drift towards sleep, and waking the moment the key dropped and clanged against the plate, so he could immediately capture whatever his mind had been generating. Thomas Edison, independently, used the same logic with a different prop. Steel ball bearings held loosely in his hand over a metal bowl, exploiting the identical mechanism without either man having a name for it. Neither was performing eccentricity for its own sake. By intuition alone, both had landed on the exact mechanism Lacaux and her colleagues would later study in a controlled laboratory setting. So what is the brain actually doing during those few seconds? Researchers believe the hypnagogic window creates a kind of cognitive looseness, a state in which the brain's normal editorial function, the part that keeps thinking tidy, logical, and focused, has begun to release its grip, but hasn't released it so completely that you lose the ability to notice and evaluate what the mind is producing. Lecoq described it as a mental twilight that allows one to freely watch the mind wander while maintaining a logical ability to identify creative sparks. The generator runs without the editor hovering over every output, but the editor hasn't quite left the room. It shares something structural with what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called the flow state, that condition of effortless absorption in which conscious self-monitoring recedes, though hypnagogia produces it through drowsiness rather than through mastery-driven immersion. Consider what McCartney's brain brought to that moment. Years of songwriting, harmonic training, absorbed melody patterns, accumulated musical knowledge at a level most people will never reach. The hypnagogic state didn't conjure yesterday from nothing. What it gave his expertise was room to combine freely, without the usual constraints of deliberate compositional thought pressing down on every choice. Creativity researchers call this the incubation period, the phase when a problem is set aside and the mind works on it below the threshold of conscious attention. And the hypnagogic state appears to be one of the most potent incubation windows the brain naturally produces. This connects to findings from studies of creative flow more broadly. Research recording the brain activity of jazz musicians during improvisation has found that when highly experienced players enter a deep creative state, the brain regions associated with cognitive control show reduced activity, not increased. Less monitoring, less management, less deliberate oversight. The picture that keeps emerging from this line of research is that peak creative performance involves releasing conscious control rather than intensifying it, which rather overturns the usual assumption about how breakthroughs happen. We tend to picture creative achievement as the product of sustained, grinding effort, someone at a desk refusing to stop until the thing is finished. Expertise clearly matters enormously, and the research supports that, but expertise seems to function as the loaded system, and the release of conscious control is what lets the system actually run. These aren't competing ideas so much as sequential ones. McCartney's conviction that he must have unconsciously stolen the melody even has a clinical name: Cryptomnesia, the mistaken belief that an idea is remembered rather than genuinely original. It's a recognized phenomenon in creative work, and the intensity of his anxiety about it points to something interesting about how alien the melody felt to his normal, deliberate self. It didn't register as something he had constructed. It registered as something that had arrived from outside him, which, as far as the neuroscience of sleep onset goes, isn't entirely wrong as a description. There are honest limits to draw here. The 2021 Hypnagogic study tested a specific structured insight problem type, and how well that generalizes to open-ended creative work or to people who haven't spent years building deep expertise in a domain remains an open question. A large 2025 meta-analysis, drawing on data from nearly 2,500 participants across multiple countries, confirmed that creativity is associated with connectivity between the brain's default mode network and its executive control network. But mapping those broad findings onto the specific conditions that produced a particular melody is a longer road than popular accounts usually acknowledge. What the research does support is a shift in how we understand those moments that feel like gifts from somewhere else. The experiences that arrive unbidden, fully formed, and slightly uncanny are looking less mystical and more mechanistic with each study. Not in a way that strips them of anything worth keeping, but in a way that makes them potentially approachable. McCartney didn't set out to exploit the hypnagogic state. He woke up, sat at the piano, and had the good sense to take seriously what was already there waiting for him. The science of what the brain's default mode network and executive control network are actually doing during creative thought is a longer story on its own, and it's one this channel will get into properly. If that's the kind of territory you want to explore, subscribing means it'll be there when it lands.